All her husbands died. When he discovered why, it was too late. Welcome, dear readers, to a journey through the veils of time, where the past whispers eternal truths to the hearts of the present. In this story, we will travel to Regency-era England, when society was governed by impeccable appearances and reputations as fragile as porcelain. But beneath the elegant balls and polite conversations dwelled dark secrets, cruel judgments, and hearts longing for understanding. This is the story of Lady Helena Ashford, a woman scarred by tragedy, judged without mercy and condemned to ostracism by a fate she never chose. It is also the story of the Marquis of Blackwood, a man shrouded in mystery and loneliness, whose curiosity will lead him to discover that the cruelest curse comes not from supernatural forces, but from human misunderstanding. Prepare yourself for a narrative that touches the most sensitive chords of the soul, the longing to be understood, the strength born from vulnerability, and the love that blossoms when we are finally seen in our deepest truth. Here, there are no irredeemable villains, only human beings trying to find their place in a world that does not always forgive. Before we begin this journey, I would like to know, where are you watching from right now? Share your city, your country in the comments. And if this story touches your heart as it touches mine to narrate it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Every gesture of support allows more stories like this to reach hearts that need to hear them. England, 1815, London and Yorkshire. The London rain carried in its drops the weight of unspoken judgments. It fell fine and persistent upon the slate roofs, streamed down the fogged windows of the drawing rooms where high society gathered, and formed small rivers in the gutters, carrying with it the dead leaves of the autumn of 1815. Lady Helena Ashford watched this rain through the stained glass of her small carriage as she was driven for the last time through the streets that had once been her familiar territory. She was only 26, yet her brown eyes held an agedness that no young face should bear. Her fingers, delicate and always cold, intertwined in her lap, clutching the worn fabric of her mourning dress. The third in 5 years. "The Black Widow," they murmured on the street corners. "The cursed woman," they whispered in the ballrooms from which she had been banished. 3 husbands in 5 years, all dead suddenly, all leaving her without fortune, without explanations, only with the crushing weight of a suspicion never proven, but eternally repeated. First, there had been Lord Ashford, her arranged husband, dead 3 months after their wedding in 1812. Then Viscount Harrington in 1813, whom she had married for convenience and necessity. Finally, Sir Edmund Grey in 1814, whose proposal she had accepted more out of desperation than hope. All had departed in the same way, suddenly, mysteriously, leaving only debts, mortgaged properties, and an increasingly isolated widow. Helena no longer cried. The tears had run dry sometime between the second and third time she had donned black. Now, all that remained was an inner silence, deep as a bottomless well, and the resigned acceptance of a fate that seemed as inevitable as the changing of the seasons. The carriage stopped before a discreet building on the outskirts of Mayfair. It was not exactly a public auction, but a private transaction, as her Aunt Margaret preferred to call it. Lady Margaret Ashford, her late father's sister, had been her only relative willing to help her after each tragedy, or so it had seemed. "Come in, dear." Margaret's voice was honey over ice. "I know this is difficult, but it is the only solution. You have no more resources, and I have already done all I could." Helena entered the dimly lit room. There were only 3 men besides Margaret, a weary-looking clerk, a lawyer with small spectacles, and him. The Marquis of Blackwood stood by the unlit fireplace, tall and motionless as a statue of dark stone. His eyes were the stormy grey of a winter sky, and they examined Helena with an intensity that was neither lust nor pity, but something more unsettling, scientific curiosity, as if she were a rare artifact he had just discovered. "Lady Helena Ashford," the lawyer announced, adjusting his papers. "The Marquis of Blackwood has offered £500 for a 5-year indenture contract. You will have lodging, food, and suitable clothing at his estate in Yorkshire. In return, you will perform domestic services as requested." Indenture. The word echoed like a funeral bell, from a lady of high society to an indentured servant. Helena looked at Margaret, searching for any trace of hesitation, any sign that there might be another option, but her aunt merely looked away, her fingers adjusting a pearl necklace that Helena recognized. It had belonged to her mother. "Where do I sign?" Helena's voice came out firmer than she expected. If she was condemned, she would at least preserve the dignity of accepting her fate with her head held high. The Marquess spoke for the first time. his voice surprisingly soft, almost pensive. "I have no interest in domestic servants, Lady Helena. I have an interest in mysteries. And you, they say, are London's greatest mystery." She raised her eyes to meet his. There was no mockery there, nor the morbid delight she had expected. Just that intense, almost scientific curiosity, and something else she could not name. That night, as the Marquis's carriage carried her away from London towards the sombre lands of Yorkshire, Helena watched the city disappear into the fog. She did not know yet that she was leaving behind not only her old life, but also the invisible chains of a truth that had imprisoned her for years. What awaited her at Blackwood Hall was more than servitude. It was the beginning of a liberation she could not yet imagine. The journey lasted 3 days under a perpetually grey sky. The Marquis of Blackwood travelled in a separate carriage, leaving Helena alone with her thoughts and the gradually transforming landscape. London and its illuminated drawing rooms were left behind, replaced by ever smaller villages, vast fields where sheep grazed in the drizzle, and finally the wild moors of Yorkshire, where the wind howled like a living creature. When Blackwood Hall emerged on the horizon on the 3rd day, Helena felt a shiver run down her spine. The mansion rose atop a solitary hill, built of dark stone that seemed to absorb the little light of dusk. It was not a welcoming place. Its narrow windows looked like suspicious eyes. Its towers resembled vigilant sentinels, and the ivy climbing its walls had the look of tentacles gripping prey. Yet, there was also a strange beauty to the edifice, an austere dignity like that of someone who had chosen isolation not out of fear, but out of weariness with the world. The housekeeper, Mrs. Halloway, was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and hands calloused by work. She received Helena at the entrance without asking questions, merely showing her to her quarters with a gentle gesture. "The Marquis is a good man, my lady," she said, using Helena's old title without irony. "Just different. Do not be frightened by his collections." The room designated for Helena was on the 2nd floor, facing the abandoned gardens at the back of the estate. It was spacious but Spartan, with a dark wood canopy bed, a writing desk by the window, and a fireplace that Mrs. Halloway hurried to light. There was also an oak wardrobe, where the housekeeper deposited the few dresses Helena had brought. "Rest today, my lady. Tomorrow the Marquess will request your presence in the library." But Helena could not rest. As night fell over Blackwood Hall, she heard strange sounds. Firm footsteps in the corridors, the dragging of heavy furniture, and occasionally a man's voice giving short orders. Curiosity, so long dormant under layers of resignation, began to awaken. When the clock struck midnight, Helena put on a robe over her nightgown and left the room. Blackwood's corridors were lit only by spaced candelabras, casting dancing shadows on the dark, wood-panelled walls. She followed the sound of footsteps to a slightly open door at the end of a long hallway. She looked through the crack, and her heart quickened. The room was vast, with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with books, but it was no ordinary library. Among the leather-bound volumes were glass display cases containing strange objects, old knives with stains that looked like rust, embroidered handkerchiefs yellowed with time, a small vial with cloudy liquid, portraits of people with solemn expressions. On the main wall, hanging under a lamplight, was a painting of a house in flames. The Marquis of Blackwood stood with his back to her, cataloguing something in a thick ledger. His silhouette was erect, his movements precise. He seemed completely absorbed, oblivious to the outside world. "You may enter, Lady Helena," he said without turning. "I noticed your footsteps in the hall 5 minutes ago. Do not worry. I do not bite." Helena hesitated only a moment before pushing the door open and entering. In the brighter light of the lamps, she could better see her new owner, employer. She did not know what to call him. Damien Blackwood was about 32, with black hair combed back, aristocratic features, and a pallor of one who spent more time among books than in the sun. But it was his eyes that intrigued her most, that stormy grey that seemed to see beyond appearances. "Welcome to my collection," he said, closing the catalogue. "I suppose you are wondering why a marquess collects relics of mysterious deaths." Helena looked around, her heart tight. Every object there told a story of loss, of an abrupt end, of unsolved mysteries. "Why?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because the dead do not lie," he replied simply. "Because in every mysterious death there is a truth the living preferred to bury. And because—" he paused, studying her with that unsettling intensity, "because I began collecting these stories after the death of my younger sister 10 years ago. They said it was an accident, but I knew there was more. I spent years searching for answers. I never found them completely, but I learned to read the clues that others ignore. Helena felt something move within her, an emotion long dormant. Compassion, perhaps, or recognition. "And what do you hope to find in me?" she asked. "The truth," he said. "Because I do not believe in curses, Lady Helena. I believe in patterns." And 3 men dead in mysterious circumstances, all married to the same woman, all leaving her without resources. That is a pattern worth investigating. He approached her, but not in a threatening way. There was almost a delicacy to his movements, as if he feared frightening her. "I did not buy you to be my servant," he said softly. "I bought your freedom from the society that condemned you without proof. Now, if you will allow me, I would like you to help me find the truth, together." For the first time in years, Helena felt something other than resignation. She felt the smallest spark of hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was someone willing to listen to her. And that possibility, as small as a candle flame in a dark room, was more precious than any fortune she had ever possessed. The first days at Blackwood Hall passed in a strange quiet. Helena would wake to the distant cawing of crows on the moors, eat breakfast alone in the small dining room that Mrs. Halloway insisted on preparing with clean linens and delicate china, and then wander the silent corridors like a ghost searching for her own story. The Marquis did not seek her out for the first 3 days. She saw him occasionally from a distance, walking through the abandoned gardens with his hands clasped behind his back, lost in thought, or sitting by the library window, reading in the faint afternoon light. He seemed a man who had learned to live in the company of his own thoughts, and Helena respected that, because she recognized the same need in herself. It was on the 4th day that he finally knocked on her bedroom door, shortly after breakfast. "I hope I am not interrupting," he said, standing in the doorway with a courteous expression, "but I would like to talk, if you are willing." Helena nodded, smoothing the simple dress she wore. She followed him to the library, where he had prepared tea and biscuits on a low table between 2 leather armchairs. It was an unexpectedly domestic gesture from a man who collected relics of death. "I need you to tell me about them," Damien said, sitting and pouring the tea with careful movements. "Your husbands, not the facts that are in the public records, but who they truly were, how they behaved, what they felt." Helena accepted the cup, feeling the warm steam against her face. For a long moment she said nothing. How could she speak of men she had barely known, of marriages that had been social transactions rather than unions of souls? "Lord Ashford was 20 years my senior," she began, her voice low but steady. "A kind man but distant. He spent his days managing his estates and rarely spoke to me beyond what was necessary. In the 3 months we lived together, I saw him laugh only once when his hunting dog had puppies." Damien did not interrupt, merely watched with that intensity she was beginning to recognize, not as judgment, but as genuine attention. "He died one winter morning. He simply did not wake up. They said it was his heart. I had dreamed of it 3 nights before." "Dreamed?" It was the first time he interrupted, and his voice carried genuine interest, not disbelief. "Yes." Helena closed her eyes, remembering. "I saw a figure lying in a bed, covered by a white sheet. I couldn't see the face, but I knew it was him. I woke with my heart pounding, tried to tell him the next day, but he just laughed and said it was feminine fancies. 2 days later it happened exactly as I had dreamed." She opened her eyes and found Damien leaning forward, completely absorbed. "And the others?" he asked softly. "Viscount Harrington was a nervous man," Helena continued, her voice firmer now. "Always worried about debts, about wages. He married me hoping my inheritance from Ashford would save him, but there was no inheritance. It had all gone to pay debts I knew nothing about. He died 6 months after our marriage. He fell down the stairs one night, broke his neck, but I already knew something would happen. I felt it as a pressure in my chest, saw shadows in the corner of my eyes, heard whispers that came from nowhere. And Sir Edmund," Helena set down her cup, her hands trembling slightly. "Sir Edmund was the worst," she admitted. "Because with him I tried to change fate. I warned him. I begged him to be careful. I told him I felt something terrible was coming. He called me mad, hysterical. 2 days later he fell suddenly ill, vomiting, convulsions. He died in less than a week. The doctors couldn't explain it." The silence that followed was dense, but not uncomfortable. Damien remained motionless, processing the information like a scholar before an ancient text. "You are not cursed," he said finally, and there was absolute conviction in his voice. "You have a gift, the ability to sense when something is wrong, when danger is approaching. And instead of listening to you, Each of these men ignored you. A gift? Helena almost laughed, but the sound came out bitter. A gift that saved no one? That only turned me into a pariah? A gift that perhaps was not understood, Damien corrected. But now here we can investigate properly. I need every document you have, letters, wills, medical records, everything. And I need you to tell me every detail you remember. Who was present, what they ate, who prepared the meals, who visited your homes. Helena looked at this strange man who for the first time did not treat her as a freak or a murderer, who looked at her as if she were an enigma worthy of being solved, not a monster to be avoided. There is one person who was present at all 3 marriages, she said slowly, the realization dawning like mist dissipating. My aunt, Lady Margaret. She insisted on accompanying me, said it was to support me. She was always very close. Damien said nothing, just nodded slowly, and in that simple gesture, Helena knew he had reached the same conclusion she was only now beginning to glimpse. Sometimes the worst monsters are not those hiding in the shadows, but those who walk beside us under the guise of protection. Spring arrived in Yorkshire, bringing with it a timid rebirth. The moors began to cover themselves in purple heather. The abandoned gardens of Blackwood Hall showed green shoots fighting through the weeds, and even the crows seemed to caw with less melancholy. But inside the mansion, Helena and Damien delved deeper and deeper into a darkness rooted in the past. Damien's library had transformed into the center of their investigation. One table was covered with documents, death certificates, wills, letters yellowed with time, financial records Helena had managed to retrieve through lawyers. Each piece was a fragment of a macabre puzzle. Look at this, Damien pointed to a series of aligned documents. Lord Ashford's will left everything to you, but there were immense debts no one knew about. Viscount Harrington had an insurance policy that would pay out to you, but it was contested and the money disappeared in lawsuits. And Sir Edmund changed his will 2 weeks before he died, leaving everything to his dear sister-in-law, who cared for him in his final moments. Helena felt the room spin. She leaned on the table, processing the information. Dear sister-in-law, her voice came out in a rough whisper. Margaret was not Sir Edmund's sister-in-law. She was my aunt, not his. Exactly. Damien crossed his arms, his face grim. But she apparently convinced a dying man to alter his will, or perhaps... He paused, picking up another document. Or perhaps she knew he was about to be dying. He slid a medical report toward Helena, which he had obtained through a contact in London. It was the record of Sir Edmund's treatment in his last days. As she read, Helena felt nausea rise in her throat. Violent vomiting, spasms, intense abdominal pain, convulsions, she read aloud. These are symptoms of arsenic poisoning, Damien completed. A favorite poison of the aristocracy, because it is easily mistaken for natural illnesses. Small doses over time, or one massive final dose. In Sir Edmund's case, it seems to have been the latter. Helena sank into an armchair, her hands shaking. Memories began to surface like fragments of a nightmare. Margaret insisting on preparing special teas for Lord Ashford, saying they would help his digestion. Margaret visiting Viscount Harrington days before his fall, bringing a bottle of brandy to calm his nerves. Margaret caring for Sir Edmund during his illness, preparing broths and medicines. She was always there, Helena whispered, always caring, always attentive, and I never suspected. She was my only family, the only person who seemed to support me when everyone else abandoned me. Precisely why, Damien said, kneeling before her and taking her cold hands in his. She used your love, your trust, your loneliness. She made you depend on her while systematically destroying your life to enrich herself. But why? Tears finally streamed down Helena's face. Why would she do that to me? I was just a child when my parents died. She raised me, took care of me, and perhaps she resented it, Damien suggested gently. Or perhaps she always had plans. Your father was wealthy, and when he died, the fortune went to you, not to Margaret. She waited, she planned, and when you married, she saw her opportunity. Helena remembered something and her eyes widened. The premonitions, she said. I always thought it was some curse, some flaw in me. But what if my body was trying to warn me? Like an animal that senses danger before seeing it? Exactly. Damien squeezed her hands. You perceived the subtle changes in your husbands. The poison altered their behaviors, their energies. Your instinct picked up on those signals, even when your conscious mind didn't understand. You are not cursed, Helena. You are extraordinarily perceptive. She looked at him through her tears, seeing something in his eyes that made her heart tighten in a completely different way. It wasn't just intellectual interest. There was genuine concern there, care, and something deeper she dared not name. "What do we do now?" she asked. "Now," he said, rising but not releasing her hands, "we gather irrefutable proof, and then we confront your aunt. But I need you to know, Helena, this will be dangerous. If Margaret finds out we are investigating, she will try to silence me," Helena completed, "like she did them." Damien nodded gravely. "But this time," Helena said, straightening her shoulders and wiping her tears, "this time someone is listening to me, and together we are stronger than any poison she can use." Outside the library, through the high window, the wind from the moors blew with renewed force, and in the air, though neither of them could see it, a delicate web was unraveling, thread by thread, about to reveal the spider that had remained hidden in its center for so long. The following weeks passed in a meticulous rhythm of discovery. Damien maintained constant correspondence with his contacts in London, discreet lawyers, retired physicians, even a private investigator he had hired years before during his search for answers about his sister's death. Each letter that arrived at Blackwood Hall brought new fragments of the truth. Helena, for her part, delved into her own memories with a courage she didn't know she possessed. She wrote in a journal Damien had given her, recording every detail she could retrieve, gestures from Margaret that had seemed kind, but now revealed calculation, seemingly casual conversations that had guided important decisions, moments when her aunt had insisted on being present during meals or private meetings. It was on a rainy afternoon in April that Helena found something that would change everything. She was exploring the back of her bedroom wardrobe, looking for a warmer shawl, when her fingers touched something hard behind the hanging dresses. It was a small wooden box, hidden under a loose board at the bottom of the piece. With trembling hands, she opened the box. Inside were letters, dozens of them yellowed with time, all addressed to Lady Margaret Ashford. Helena recognized the handwriting on some. They were from Lord Ashford, Viscount Harrington, Sir Edmund. Letters that had never been mentioned, that she had never been invited to read. She took the box to the library, where Damien was working on his catalogues. Seeing her enter with a pale face, he immediately dropped his pen. "What happened?" "I found this," she said, placing the box on the table. "Hidden in my room. They are letters from my husband's to Margaret." Together, they began to read. At first, the letters seemed innocent. Thanks for hospitality, comments on the weather. But as they advanced chronologically, patterns began to emerge. A letter from Lord Ashford written 2 weeks before his death. "My dear Margaret, I deeply appreciate your concern for my health. The teas you have been preparing truly seem to help with my palpitations, though they sometimes leave me drowsy. As you suggested, I will keep this treatment discreet. Helena worries too much, and I do not wish to alarm her." He was being medicated without his knowledge, Damien murmured. She convinced him she was helping when, in fact, Helena picked up another letter, this one from Viscount Harrington. "Lady Margaret, your visit was a relief in these difficult times. The brandy you brought is of excellent quality and has been helping me sleep better despite the financial anxieties. You are right, I need not trouble Helena with these matters. She has suffered so much already." "She isolated them," Helena said, her voice trembling. "She made them keep secrets from me, created distance between us, and at the same time she administered substances that weakened them. The last letter was from Sir Edmund, written just 3 days before his death. The handwriting was shaky. "Margaret, I am very ill. The doctors do not understand what I have. You were the only one who remained by my side when even my wife seemed distant. I accept your suggestion to alter my will. If something should happen to me, at least I will know my fortune will go to someone who truly cared for me." Helena had to step back, breathing heavily. Damien followed her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "She made me seem distant," Helena whispered. "She told him I was distant when in fact I tried to visit him. But she was always there, always saying he needed to rest, that I was tiring him with my hysterical worries. She manipulated all of you perfectly," Damien said, his voice hard with contained anger. "She kept you away while she poisoned them, and when they died you were left with the blame and she with the money." Helena turned to him and something in her face changed. There was no longer just sadness there, but determination forged in the fire of revealed truth. "We have the letters. We have the medical records showing symptoms of poisoning. What else do we need?" "Witnesses," Damien said. People who saw Margaret close to your husband's, who perhaps witnessed her manipulations without realizing it at the time, and, if possible, physical evidence. If she used arsenic, she might still have some in her possession. She will come here, Helena said suddenly. What? Margaret. She will come to check if I am truly settled meekly as her servant. She always needed to have control, to see with her own eyes. It is only a matter of time before her curiosity brings her to Yorkshire. Damien smiled, but it was a joyless smile. Then we will be prepared. But, Helena, he hesitated, then continued, when she comes you will need to pretend. Pretend you are still the broken woman she left in London. If she senses you are strong, that you have discovered the truth. I know. Helena straightened her shoulders. I learned from the best, after all. Years of watching Margaret manipulate everyone around her. I can be the grateful niece, the resigned widow, for long enough to catch her in her own trap. Damien studied her face for a long moment, and Helena saw something in it that made her heart race. It wasn't just admiration for her courage, but something deeper, more personal. You are extraordinary, he said softly. I don't know how I didn't see it immediately. It was always there under all that forced resignation, the strength of a woman who survived the unthinkable. Helena felt warmth rise to her face, but she did not look away. And you, she said, are the first person in years who looked at me and saw beyond the curse, who believed there was a truth worth discovering. They stood like that, in the middle of the library, surrounded by evidence and mysteries, connected by something that went beyond the investigation. But they both knew the time was not yet right. First, they needed to finish what they had started. Justice before any possibility of happiness. The rain continued to fall outside, washing the moors. And somewhere in London, a woman who thought herself too clever to be caught was about to discover that even the most carefully woven webs can unravel when someone finally finds the first loose thread. The letter arrived on a sunny May morning, breaking the pattern of constant rain that characterized Yorkshire. Mrs. Halloway brought it to the dining room where Helena and Damien were breakfasting together, a habit they had acquired in recent weeks, finding comfort in each other's company before diving into the day's investigations. Helena immediately recognized the red wax seal and the elegant handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened the envelope. It's from her, she murmured, reading quickly. Margaret, she says she is worried about my well-being and will come to visit me next week. She will stay at Blackwood Hall for a few days, if the Marquis is so kind as to host her. Damien set down his teacup with a deliberate click. Then it is time, he said. 1 week to prepare. The following days were spent in meticulous planning. Damien contacted a magistrate he trusted in York, discreetly presenting the evidence they had collected. The magistrate agreed to be available, but insisted they needed something more concrete, a direct testimony, a confession, or physical evidence of the poison in Margaret's possession. We need to make her reveal something, Damien said as they organized the documents, perhaps through a careful trap. I know exactly how, Helena replied, her eyes shining with an intelligence that had been suppressed for too many years. Margaret has always been arrogant. She believes she is smarter than everyone. If I appear completely broken, completely under her influence, she won't be able to resist gloating, especially if she thinks I am alone with her. Absolutely not. Damien stood up abruptly. I will not leave you alone with a murderer. I won't be alone. Helena touched his arm. You will be hidden, listening to everything, and I need to do this, Damien. I need to face her. I need to hear the truth from her own lips. He looked at her for a long time, conflict evident on his face. Finally he nodded, but at the first sign of real danger, I intervene. I don't care if it ruins the evidence. The day of Margaret's arrival dawned clear and crisp. Helena wore one of her simplest dresses, left her hair pinned up carelessly, and applied a little pale powder to look sicker than she was. When she looked in the mirror, she saw reflected there the woman Margaret expected to find, defeated, humble, grateful for the slightest kindness. Margaret's carriage arrived at noon. She descended with her characteristic elegance, dressed in expensive traveling clothes, her pearl necklace, Helena's mother's necklace, shining in the sun. Upon seeing Helena waiting at the entrance, her face lit up with a smile that did not reach her cold eyes. Dear niece, she exclaimed, embracing Helena with a familiarity that now made her skin crawl. How are you? The country air seems to have done you good. You are less agitated. Aunt Margaret, Helena lowered her eyes submissively. Thank you for coming. I have missed you so much. Damien received Margaret with a cold but appropriate courtesy. During dinner that night, he played the role of the eccentric but polite Marquis perfectly, asking polite questions about London, while watching Margaret with disguised attention. It was only on the second day that Helena executed her plan. During breakfast, she casually mentioned that the Marquess would have to travel to York that afternoon to resolve legal matters and would be gone overnight. "It will be just the two of us," Helena said with a faint smile. "Like old times." Margaret's eyes glittered. That afternoon, after Damien ostensibly left in his carriage, but in truth only circled the grounds and returned discreetly, hiding in a secret passage behind the library bookshelves, Helena invited Margaret for tea in her private sitting room. "It's cozier here," she said, "and we can talk freely." She prepared the tea with her own hands, aware of Margaret's watchful gaze. She served her first, taking care that her aunt saw they both drank from the same pot. "You seem to be adapting well," Margaret commented, settling into the armchair. "Although I must say, I never imagined you as a servant." "It is temporary," Helena said very quietly. "Only 5 years, and after I am not sure what I will do. I have nothing, no one." "You have me," Margaret said, but there was something cruel in her tone. "You will always have me, dear. Even if you are, how shall I put it, unlucky." "Unlucky," Helena repeated, letting the word hang between them. "That is a kind way of saying cursed, isn't it?" "Well," Margaret shrugged, 3 husbands, dear. 3. People talk. I cannot blame them." "You never believed I was cursed, did you?" Helena asked softly. "You always knew the truth." The air in the room seemed to freeze. Margaret slowly raised her eyes, her expression shifting to something more cautious. "I don't know what you are talking about." "No?" Helena set down her cup. "Then it is a coincidence that you were present at every death, that you prepared teas for Lord Ashford, brought brandy for the Viscount, cared for Sir Edmund during his illness." Margaret remained motionless for a long moment. Then surprisingly she smiled. "My dear niece," she said, her voice suddenly devoid of any feigned warmth, "you are finally asking the right questions. I thought you would never be clever enough." Helena felt her heart race, but she kept her face calm. "So it's true, you killed them." "I did," Margaret confirmed with frightening simplicity. "And it was ridiculously easy. Men are so arrogant, so convinced that women pose no danger. Lord Ashford the fool believed I was helping him with his heart condition. Harrington thought I was a gentle confidant. And Edmund," she laughed softly, "Edmund truly believed I loved him more than you did." "Why?" Helena had to make an effort to keep her voice steady. "Why would you do it? I was your niece. You raised me." "Exactly." Margaret's eyes gleamed with an old anger. "I raised you. I sacrificed my youth, my chances of marriage, to care for my brother's child. And how was I rewarded? He left everything to you. Every pound, every property. For me, just a small lifetime allowance. As if I were a servant." "So you waited," Helena said, the final understanding dawning. "You waited until I married, and then I took what was mine by right," Margaret completed. "Each marriage was an opportunity, but you were so stubborn, always having those men change their wills in your favor before I had time to act. I had to be more creative, faster. With Edmund, I finally succeeded. His will left me everything." In the secret passage, Damien listened to every word, his hand clenched into a fist. Beside him stood the magistrate, whom he had secretly brought back with him. Every word Margaret spoke was being heard by legal witnesses. "And what about me?" Helena asked. "You didn't care what it did to me? How society treated me?" "Frankly, no," Margaret said coldly. "You were a means to an end. And when the marriage opportunities ran out, well, selling you to this eccentric Marquess seemed appropriate. At least I got another £500. Helena stood up, her posture changing. She was no longer the broken, submissive woman. "You confessed," she said, her voice clear and strong. "You confessed to murder, manipulation, and theft. And you did it in front of witnesses." Margaret paled as the library wall opened, and Damien emerged, followed by the magistrate and 2 constables. "Lady Margaret Ashford," the magistrate said solemnly, "you are under arrest for the murders of Lord Ashford, Viscount Harrington and Sir Edmund Grey, as well as for fraud and conspiracy." Margaret rose with a cry of rage, looking at Helena with pure hatred. "You little viper! You tricked me." "I learned from the best," Helena replied calmly. As they led Margaret away, screaming threats and insults, Damien approached Helena. She was trembling now that the adrenaline was fading, and he enveloped her in his arms. "It's over," he murmured. "It's all over, Helena. You were so brave." She clung to him, finally allowing the tears to come, not of sadness, but of relief. Years of weight, of guilt, of loneliness, finally dissolving. Outside, the sun was setting over the Yorkshire moors, painting the sky gold and pink, and for the first time since she could remember, Helena looked to the future and saw not darkness, but possibility. The trial of Lady Margaret Ashford became the sensation of the London season, and Helena did not need to be present to know it. Letters arrived regularly at Blackwood Hall, brought by messengers Damien kept in contact with in the capital. Each correspondence brought new details: the shock of society, Margaret's full confessions before the court, the discovery of a small box of arsenic hidden in her London residence. But Helena did not return to London for the trial. Damien offered her the choice, making it clear her presence was not necessary. The evidence was irrefutable, and her recorded confession was sufficient. And Helena, surprising herself, found she felt no need to see Margaret again. That chapter of her life was closed. Instead, she remained in Yorkshire, walking the moors that were beginning to bloom with the arrival of summer. Mrs. Halloway, who had learned the full truth, treated Helena no longer as a forced guest, but as the lady the mansion deserved. Helena's wardrobe was filled with new dresses, not overly luxurious, but of fine quality and in colors that were not black: pale lavender, sky blue, sage green that reflected the surrounding landscape. It was during one of these walks that Helena finally understood what her gift truly meant. Standing on a hilltop, the wind weaving through her hair, she closed her eyes and felt. There was no pressure in her chest, no whispers of danger, no shadows in the corners of her vision. For the first time in years, her body was at peace. "You are not a harbinger of death," Damien had told her one night as they studied in the library. "You simply feel when something is wrong. Like an animal that senses a storm before the clouds appear, it is an extraordinarily sharp survival instinct." And he was right. Helena began to realize she felt other things too. She knew when Mrs. Halloway was sad, even when the housekeeper smiled. She sensed when Damien was worried, even when he said nothing. Even the horses in the stables seemed to respond to her in a special way, calming when she approached. It was not a curse. It was empathy, elevated to an art form. The final letter arrived on a June morning. Damien brought it personally to the garden where Helena was working, for the first time since her arrival, restoring the abandoned flower beds. She looked at him, read on his face that it was important news, and wiped the garden soil from her hands before accepting the envelope. Lady Margaret Ashford had been convicted. Not to death. The aristocracy rarely faced the gallows, even for murder, but to life imprisonment in an institution for upper-class criminals. Her assets were seized, and the fortunes stolen from Lord Ashford, Viscount Harrington, and Sir Edmund Grey were being returned to Helena as the rightful heiress. Helena read the letter twice, then folded it carefully. "How do you feel?" Damien asked softly. She considered the question. How did she feel? There was no triumph, no joy at Margaret's downfall, but there was also no guilt, no crushing weight she had carried for so long. "I feel light," she said finally, "as if someone has removed chains I didn't even know I was wearing." Damien smiled, and she noticed for the first time how his eyes lit up when he truly smiled, not those polite smiles he used in public. "There is something else," he said, reaching into the inner pocket of his coat. "I managed to have the magistrate do this." He handed her a legal document. Helena recognized the format immediately. It was her indenture contract. But now there was a red wax seal stamped over it, and the words "null and void" written in large letters. "You are free, Helena," Damien said. "Completely free. Free from the society that condemned you. Free from Margaret. And," he hesitated, "free from me if you wish. You have resources now. You can go anywhere. Do anything. You owe nothing to anyone." Helena looked at the document, then at Damien, and something in her chest tightened. Not with fear or pressure, but with a completely different feeling. "And what if I don't want to go?" she asked softly. What if I want to stay here? In Yorkshire, at Blackwood Hall with..." She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Damien took a step forward, his stormy grey eyes intense. "Helena," he said, his voice hoarse, "I need you to know that I never planned this. When I brought you here, it was truly just for intellectual curiosity. But you, getting to know you, seeing your strength, your kindness, even after everything you suffered." He paused, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "I have fallen in love with you, completely, irrevocably. And I know it is terribly inappropriate to say this now, when you have just regained your freedom, when you should be thinking of yourself and not of..." Helena silenced him by placing her fingers against his lips. Damien, she said, when Margaret was being taken away, do you know what I thought? I thought, I am finally free to choose. Free to choose where to live, whom to live with, how to love. And I choose this. I choose you. I choose to stay. He pulled her into his arms then, and the kiss they shared tasted of promises and beginnings, of gardens being reborn and storms past. When they finally separated, they were both laughing and crying at the same time. But we must do this properly, Damien said, stepping back reluctantly. A proper courtship. Time for you to heal completely, to be sure. I don't want anyone to say I took advantage of your circumstances. Always so honorable. Helena smiled, but she understood. And the truth was, for the first time in her life, she had time. Time to heal, to grow, to learn who she was when she wasn't living under the shadow of tragedies. How long a courtship do you suggest? She asked, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Oh, at least 6 months, he said solemnly. Perhaps even a year. We need to properly scandalize society by making it clear we fell in love for real, not for convenience. 6 months, Helena considered. Enough time to finish restoring the garden, to relearn how to laugh without fear, to discover who Helena Ashford is when she isn't being defined by the deaths that surrounded her. Exactly. Damien took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. And then, if you still want to, we will make the formal proposal. We will silence all the rumors not with defenses, but with the simple truth. You are extraordinary, and I was lucky enough to be clever enough to see it. Helena looked around, at the garden being reborn, at the mansion that now seemed less dark, at the moors stretching out under the immense sky, and for the first time she felt she belonged somewhere not by obligation or circumstance, but by choice. The storm had passed, and what remained was the promise of sunny days ahead. The summer in Yorkshire proved to be surprisingly gentle. The moors exploded in colours Helena had never imagined possible, deep purples of heather, vibrant yellows of gorse, and the infinite green that changed hue as the clouds passed. She spent hours walking those landscapes, sometimes alone, sometimes with Damien, rediscovering the simple pleasure of existing without fear. Mrs. Halloway had become more than a housekeeper. She was almost a friend, a confidant. It was she who first noticed the change in Helena. "You glow, my lady," the housekeeper said one morning, as they were making preserves in the kitchen, "like a plant that has finally found the sun after years in the shade." And it was true. Helena felt different, more whole. Her gift, as Damien insisted on calling it, began to manifest in more subtle and useful ways. She sensed when storms were approaching hours in advance, long before the sky darkened. She knew when the estate animals were ill before they showed obvious symptoms, and most importantly, she could read people with a clarity that went beyond mere facial expressions. It was this gift that made her realize when something was bothering Damien. It was early August and they were in the library, their shared refuge, when Helena noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed on the arm of the chair, a habit he had when he was worried but trying to hide it. "What is wrong?" she asked directly. Damien looked up, surprised. "Nothing is wrong." "Damien," she set down her book, "do not lie to me. I can feel your unease from here." He sighed, recognizing the futility of hiding anything from her. "I received a letter today, from a woman in Leeds. She read about Margaret's trial in the newspapers and—" He hesitated. "She believes her husband was poisoned. The symptoms she describes are identical to Sir Edmund's. She is asking me for help." Helena felt a familiar tingle run down her skin, but this time it wasn't accompanied by fear. It was anticipation. "And you want to help?" she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes. But Helena, this would mean investigating another possible murder, plunging into another dark mystery, and you have just escaped all of that. I don't want to tear you from your newfound peace." Helena was silent for a moment, processing. She thought of the years she had spent as a victim, being the mystery others tried to solve, and now she had the opportunity to be different, to use what she had learned, what she had survived, to help others. "Read me the letter," she said finally. Damien carefully picked up the envelope and read. The letter was from a Mrs. Caroline Webb, widow of a successful merchant in Leeds. Her husband had died suddenly 3 months ago, leaving his fortune to his business partner in a will altered just 2 weeks before his death. Caroline described the symptoms: vomiting, abdominal pain, confusion, and mentioned that the partner had been surprisingly attentive in her husband's final days, visiting frequently, bringing meals. The pattern was unmistakable. "She needs help," Helena said, "and we can offer it." "We?" Damien studied her carefully. We, Helena confirmed. You have the knowledge, the network of contacts, the skill to investigate, and She paused, understanding the truth as she spoke it. I have the ability to read people, to sense when something is wrong. Together, we could do more than just solve this case. We could help others like me, others who have been unjustly accused or who suffer under the weight of mysterious deaths. Damien stood up and walked over to her, kneeling before her chair to be at her eye level. Are you certain? This would be turning your tragedy into purpose. It would be reliving those days, those feelings. Not reliving, Helena corrected. It would be reframing. For years, people told me my premonition of death was a curse. But what if it's a gift that can prevent other deaths, save others from the traps I couldn't avoid? She touched his face, seeing the concern in his eyes. Damien, for the first time in my life, I feel I have a purpose beyond simply surviving. You showed me that the truth can be discovered, that the wronged can find justice. Let me be part of that. Let us be part of that together. He covered her hand with his, closing his eyes briefly. When he opened them, there was decision there. Then we will do this properly. We will reply to Mrs. Webb. We will investigate her case. But Helena, you set the boundaries. If at any moment it becomes too much, if the memories are too painful, you stop. No judgment, no guilt. Agreed? Agreed, she smiled. But I think you will find I am stronger than I look. Oh, I already know you are strong, he said, standing and pulling her to her feet as well. You are the strongest person I have ever met. That is why I am certain that, together, we can make a real difference. That night, they worked side by side, composing a reply to Mrs. Webb. Damien wrote, Helena dictated, and between them something new was born, a partnership not just of investigation, but of shared purpose. When they finished, Damien read the letter aloud. Dear Mrs. Webb, we have received your correspondence with the seriousness it deserves. Please accept our most sincere condolences for the loss of your husband. We understand deeply what it means to be unjustly suspected in times of grief. We will be in Leeds within 2 weeks to begin the investigation. Please gather all documents you can, wills, medical records, letters, and if possible prepare a list of people who had close contact with your husband in the weeks before his death. The truth can be discovered, justice can be served, and you are not alone. With sincere respect, Marquis Damien Blackwood, Lady Helena Ashford. Lady Helena Ashford, Helena repeated softly. No longer a widow, no longer a victim, just myself. Yourself is more than enough, Damien said, and there was so much love in his voice that Helena's heart quickened. They sent the letter the next day, and while they awaited a reply, Helena trained her gift, learning to trust it, to listen to it without fear. She walked the moors, paying attention to every sensation, every premonition. She studied with Damien about poisons, investigation methods, the psychology of murderers. She was preparing not only to help Mrs. Webb, but for a life that finally had meaning beyond survival. And when Mrs. Webb's reply arrived, a letter full of gratitude and renewed hope, Helena knew she had made the right choice. Her gift was not a curse. It never had been. It was just a tool that needed to be understood and used with purpose. The storm of her past life had forged something rare in her, the ability to see what others did not, to feel what others ignored. And now, finally, she would know how to use it not as a burden, but as a blessing. The journey to Leeds took 2 days under a late summer sky, when the clouds raced fast and the light had that particular golden quality of August. Helena watched from the carriage window, not with the resignation of months past, but with renewed purpose. Beside her, Damien reviewed his notes, occasionally reading excerpts aloud to her. The deceased's partner, a Mr. Thomas Blackwell, took over the business completely after the death, Damien murmured. Interesting that he has the same surname as I, though no relation. The firm was in textile importation, quite profitable according to the records. Helena closed her eyes, allowing her instinct to work. She could already feel something, a subtle discord in the air, like a slightly out-of-tune violin string. It wasn't the heavy premonition of imminent death that had haunted her before, but a feeling of deception, of hidden truths waiting to be revealed. He is lying, she said softly. Whoever this Thomas Blackwell is, he is hiding something. Damien did not question her intuition. In the months since they had begun investigating together, he had learned to trust her perceptions completely. Mrs. Caroline Webb lived in a comfortable but not ostentatious house on the outskirts of Leeds. She was a woman in her 40s, with brown hair beginning to grey at the temples, her eyes intelligent but weary. Upon seeing them arrive, her face lit up with hope. "Marquis Blackwood, Lady Ashford," she curtsied. "I thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming." Helena took the widow's hands in hers, instantly feeling the deep loneliness, the frustration of not being believed, the weight of unspoken suspicion. It was all so familiar. "You are not alone," Helena said firmly, "and you are not responsible for your husband's death, no matter what others may imply." Caroline Webb blinked rapidly, tears welling in her eyes. "How do you know? How can you be so certain?" "Because I know what it is like," Helena replied simply. They spent the afternoon reviewing documents in Caroline's sitting room. Mr. Edward Webb's original will left everything to his wife. The altered will, signed 2 weeks before his death, divided the business equally between Caroline and Thomas Blackwell, but gave Blackwell complete operational control. "He said my husband was worried I couldn't manage the business alone," Caroline explained, her voice trembling. "That Edward wanted to ensure the company remained prosperous." "But your husband had never expressed such concerns before?" Damien asked. "Never. Edward always consulted me on important decisions. He trusted my judgment. And then, suddenly, in a matter of days, he was agitated, confused, saying strange things. Thomas was always there, helping, bringing documents to sign, preparing teas to calm his nerves." Helena and Damien exchanged a significant look. "May we see the medical records?" Damien requested. Caroline produced a thin folder. The doctor who attended Edward Webb in his final days had noted familiar symptoms: severe nausea, abdominal pain, mental confusion, tremors. The cause of death had been listed as sudden heart failure, convenient, vague, and impossible to contest without a deeper examination. "I need to meet Thomas Blackwell," Helena said suddenly. "In person." Caroline hesitated. "He will not be receptive. When I questioned the will, he threatened to sue me for defamation." "Then we will not question him directly," Damien said, a plan forming in his mind. "Mrs. Webb, would you be willing to mention in social circles that you are considering selling your share of the business to investors from London? Specifically, that a certain Marquess has shown interest?" Caroline understood immediately. "He will come to investigate. Thomas is possessive of the company. He will not tolerate outside interference." "Exactly," Damien smiled. "And when he comes, we will be ready." It took only 3 days. Caroline spread the rumors carefully, and as predicted, Thomas Blackwell appeared at the Webb house demanding a meeting. Helena observed him through the window curtain before he entered. He was a man of about 50, well-dressed but without true elegance, his red face suggesting an explosive temperament or excessive drink, probably both. And there was something in his eyes, a calculating hardness, that made Helena's skin tingle in warning. "It's him," she murmured to Damien. He did it. When Blackwell entered the sitting room, he found not only Caroline but also Damien seated comfortably in an armchair, dressed in his finest Marquess attire, a deliberate statement of power and position. "Mr. Blackwell," Damien said coolly, "what an unexpected surprise." Blackwell stopped, clearly not expecting to find the Marquis there. Mrs. Webb, I did not know you had company." "Sit down, Mr. Blackwell." Caroline indicated a chair, her voice firmer than it had been in months. "I believe we need to discuss the future of the Webb Company." Helena entered the room carrying a tea tray, a trick they had planned to allow her to get close to Blackwell without raising suspicion. As she was serving, she deliberately stumbled, spilling a little tea on the table near him. "Oh, forgive me," she exclaimed, grabbing a handkerchief to clean it. The distraction allowed her to briefly touch Blackwell's arm as he moved away from the hot water. The contact was enough. Helena felt everything: the corrosive greed, the wounded pride from years as the junior partner, the anger at Edward Webb for succeeding where he had failed, and most importantly, the complete lack of remorse. This was a man who saw people as obstacles to be removed, not human beings to be respected. She moved away, her hands trembling slightly, and met Damien's eyes. He read her expression and nodded almost imperceptibly. The meeting that followed was tense. Damien skillfully probed about the business operations, asking questions that seemed casual but were meticulously calculated to make Blackwell uncomfortable. Helena remained silent, observing, using her gift to read every micro-expression, every shift in his posture. It was when Damien casually mentioned reviewing Edward Webb's medical records, standard procedure before any substantial investment, that Blackwell revealed his vulnerability. His face paled slightly, His fingers gripped the arms of the chair. Medical records? Why would that be relevant? Oh, just due diligence, Damien said lightly. We want to understand all the circumstances of Mr. Webb's death. In fact, we are considering requesting an exhumation and a second medical opinion. The symptoms described are intriguing. Exhumation. Blackwell stood up abruptly. That is outrageous, a violation. Mrs. Webb, you cannot allow this. Actually, Caroline said calmly, a new strength in her voice, I think it is exactly what should be done. My husband deserves for the truth to be known. Blackwell looked between them, realizing too late that he had walked into a trap. I have an engagement, he said abruptly. We must continue this discussion another day. Oh, I'm afraid not, said a new voice from the door. The magistrate Damien had discreetly brought from York entered the room, accompanied by 2 constables. Mr. Thomas Blackwell, the magistrate said solemnly, I need to ask you some questions regarding the death of Mr. Edward Webb and about certain financial documents showing very interesting transfers from your account to that of a certain apothecary known for selling questionable substances. Blackwell tried to run, but the constables restrained him, and as the interrogation proceeded, the truth slowly emerged. The arsenic purchased under a false name, the frequent friendly visits during which the poison was administered in small doses in teas and meals, the manipulation of Edward Webb as the poison affected his mind, making him sign the altered will. It was Margaret Ashford all over again, but with a male face. The same pattern, the same greed, the same calculating coldness. That night, after Blackwell was taken into custody and Caroline Webb finally cried tears of relief and vindication, Helena and Damien walked through the gardens of the Webb estate under a starry sky. You were right, Damien said. From the moment you saw him, you knew. Yes, Helena looked at the stars. And for the first time, that knowledge was used for justice, not just to powerlessly witness tragedy. Damien stopped, turning her to face him. You were extraordinary today. The way you read Blackwell, how you kept calm, how you helped Caroline find her strength. Helena, you didn't just solve a mystery. You saved a woman from living the life you were forced to live. Helena touched his face, seeing in it not just admiration, but deep, lasting love. We saved her, she corrected. Together, as we will do again for others who need it. And there, under the stars of northern England, they sealed that promise with a kiss that tasted of purpose, found and shared futures. September painted Yorkshire in hues of gold and amber. The moors prepared for autumn, and Blackwood Hall breathed with a peace it had not known in years. Helena spent her days between the restored garden, now flourishing and organized, a mirror of her own transformation, and the library, where she and Damien continued their investigations. Letters arrived regularly now. People who had read in the papers about the Webb case, about the lady who saw the truth, as some sensationalist journalists had dubbed her. Each letter brought a story of suspicious deaths, altered wills, ignored suspicions, and each one touched Helena's heart. We cannot help them all, Damien said one afternoon, watching her read another desperate letter. Helena, you must set boundaries, or this will consume you. I know, she admitted, setting the correspondence down. But Damien, every one of these letters could have been written by me a year ago. People who are lonely, powerless, ignored by society because their suspicions are inconvenient for the powerful. Then we need a system, he said, already thinking. A way to identify the most urgent cases, where we can make a real difference, and, he hesitated, and perhaps it is time to return to London. Helena looked up, surprised. London? Why? Because real change happens in the capital. If we want to establish better investigation methods, if we want authorities to take these cases seriously, we need the influence only London can offer. And, he took her hand, the 6 months we promised are over. In fact, it has been 7, and I would like to ask for your hand properly, before society, so that no one can say it was out of convenience or scandal. Helena's heart quickened. In the months since Margaret's capture, she and Damien had built a partnership so deep that she sometimes forgot they were not technically married, but he was right. Returning to London, facing the society that had condemned her, would be the true proof that she was healed. I'm afraid, she admitted honestly, of society, the stares, the whispers. I know, Damien squeezed her hand, but you will not be alone this time, and Helena, you are no longer the same woman who left London. You are stronger, more confident, with a defined purpose. And the truth is, on your side now, all of London knows Margaret was the murderer, not you. How long has it been since you were in London? Helena asked, 3 years, he admitted, since my sister's funeral. I have been avoiding society just as much as you were forced to avoid it, but perhaps it is time for both of us to return to the world. They left on a crisp October morning, leaving Blackwood Hall in Mrs. Halloway's capable care. The journey back to London was completely different from the one Helena had made the previous winter. This time she travelled in a marquis's carriage, not as an indentured servant but as an honoured guest. Hand beside her was a man who loved her not despite her history, but perhaps in part because of it, for having survived, for having chosen to turn pain into purpose. London in October was a burst of activity as the aristocracy returned from their country estates for the social season. The streets were full of elegant carriages, the parks green with the last colours of autumn, and the ballrooms already beginning to light up for the first events of the season. Damien had rented an elegant house in Mayfair, not far ironically from where Helena and Margaret had lived, but this time Helena crossed the threshold as a lady, not a victim. "We will start slowly," Damien said as they settled in. "Small visits, teas with a few selected people. We will let society gradually get used to your presence. And then, in a month, I will host a ball. It will be our official announcement." "A ball?" Helena smiled, nervous but also a little excited. "It has been so long since I danced." "Then we will have to practice," Damien said, extending his hand right there in the middle of the still unarranged drawing room. "May I, my lady?" They danced without music, their steps echoing in the empty space, and laughed when they nearly stumbled. And in that moment Helena realized she was no longer afraid. She was nervous, yes, apprehensive about how she would be received, but not the paralyzing dread from before. The first visits were carefully orchestrated. Damien invited acquaintances he knew to be open-minded and compassionate. Curious duchesses, scientists who admired his investigation work, even some members of Parliament, interested in reforming laws on poisoning and suspicious death investigations. The reaction was surprising. Instead of hostility, Helena encountered mostly curiosity and, in some cases, genuine admiration. "Lady Ashford," a viscountess said during a tea, "I deeply admire your courage. To have survived such betrayal and then to have the strength to help others, it is truly inspiring." But not everyone was receptive. Some old guard matrons still turned up their noses, still whispered behind fans. And one day, during a stroll in Hyde Park, Helena encountered a group of young society women she had known years before. They did not greet her. They simply turned their backs, ostensibly and deliberately. Helena felt the familiar pang of humiliation, but this time Damien was by her side. He said nothing, just offered his arm with renewed dignity and guided her to continue her walk, her head held high. "They do not matter," he murmured. "The people who are truly worthwhile already see your truth." And it was true. In the following days and weeks, Helena realized she was building something new, not the reputation she had before the disastrous marriages, but a reputation based on substance. She was known not as the cursed widow, but as the investigating lady, or the Marquis of Blackwood's partner in his work for justice. Letters continued to arrive, and now they could answer them more efficiently, consulting directly with magistrates, doctors, investigators. They established something of an informal office in the Mayfair house where people could come with their concerns. It was during one of these consultations that something unexpected happened. A young woman entered, nervous and hesitant. When she removed her hood, Helena recognized her. It was Mary Fairfax, one of the young women who had turned her back in the park. "Lady Ashford," Mary said, her hands trembling. I need help, and I don't know who else to turn to." Helena could have been cold. She could have turned her back as Mary had, but she was no longer that person. She looked at Damien, who nodded encouragingly, and invited Mary to sit. "Tell me," Helena said gently, and Mary told her. Her own younger sister had died suddenly the previous summer. The doctors said it was fever, but Mary had always suspected her brother-in-law, who inherited everything and remarried surprisingly quickly. But when she tried to question it, her family silenced her, saying she was being hysterical, that she was staining her sister's memory with unfounded suspicions. "I turned my back on you in the park," Mary said, tears streaming, "because I was afraid too. Afraid of being associated with you, afraid of being seen as mad. But now I am living what you lived, and I understand. Forgive me. Please, help me." Helena took Mary's hands in hers. "You are forgiven," she said simply. "And yes, we will help you, because no one deserves to carry this weight alone." That night, after Mary had left with renewed hope and an investigation plan established, Helena stood on the balcony looking out at the lights of London. Damien came to stand beside her, wrapping her in his arms. "You did a beautiful thing today," he murmured. "You turned an enemy into an ally, showed compassion where you could have shown vengeance." "It wasn't difficult," Helena said honestly, "because I understand now that the people who judged me weren't evil. They were just frightened and ignorant, just as I was ignorant about Margaret for so long." "You are extraordinary," he said, kissing her temple, "and I am the luckiest man in London to have you by my side." Helena turned in his arms, looking up at the face that had become so dear. "Damien," she said, "you don't have to wait until the ball. If you want to ask me now, my answer is yes." "It was always yes." He smiled, that rare, true smile that completely transformed his face, and knelt right there on the balcony under the London stars. "Helena Ashford," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion, "you showed me that life can be more than dark mysteries and loneliness. You taught me about courage, about transformation, about how the greatest strength comes not from never falling, but from rising again and again. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my equal in all things?" "Yes," she said, pulling him to his feet. 1,000 times, yes. The kiss they shared tasted of fulfilled promises and bright futures. And London, the city that had once been the stage for her greatest tragedies, now witnessed her sweetest triumph. Preparations for the ball consumed the following weeks. Damien insisted it be a grand event, not for show but to make a clear statement to society. Lady Helena Ashford was not returning in shame, but in triumph. Helena chose a dress of deep blue, the color of the sky at dusk, embroidered with silver threads that caught the light like stars. It was not the black of mourning, nor the white of innocence. It was a color that spoke of depth, of mystery, chosen rather than imposed, of nights that held beauty as well as darkness. The modiste who created the dress cried when Helena tried it on for the first time. "It is perfect, my lady," she murmured. "You look like a goddess of the night, powerful and beautiful." Helena looked at herself in the mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. She was not the naive young woman who had married Lord Ashford, nor the broken woman who had arrived at Blackwood Hall. She was someone new, forged in the fire of adversity and tempered by truth and love. The night of the ball arrived with a full moon that turned London to silver. The residence Damien had rented was lit with hundreds of candles, and the flowers, not traditional red roses, but purple heather from Yorkshire, filled the rooms with their wild scent. "A touch of home," Damien explained when Helena questioned the choice, "to remind everyone where you found your strength." The guests began to arrive at 8:00. It was not a ball exclusively for the high aristocracy. Damien and Helena had invited a deliberate mix. Open-minded nobles, scientists, doctors, investigators, and even some of the people they had helped. Mrs. Caroline Webb was there, radiant in lavender. Mary Fairfax and her family, grateful for the investigation Helena and Damien were conducting. Even magistrates and members of Parliament interested in social reform. When Helena descended the staircase to join the guests, a hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to her, and for a moment, Helena felt the old fear threaten to return. Then Damien was at her side, offering his arm, his grey eyes saying without words, "You are not alone. You will never be alone again." "Ladies and gentlemen," Damien's voice filled the hall, "it is with immense pride and joy that I present to you Lady Helena Ashford, my fiancée, my partner, and the most extraordinary woman I have ever known." The applause that followed was hesitant at first, but it gained strength, and then people began to approach, not to judge, but to greet. "Lady Ashford," said an elderly duke, whom Helena vaguely recognized, "I admire your work. My own sister died in suspicious circumstances 20 years ago. No one wanted to investigate, but perhaps it is never too late for the truth." "It is never too late," Helena assured him. The music began, and Damien led her to the dance floor. As they spun beneath the chandeliers, Helena closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the perfection of the instant, not because it was free of pain or memories, but because it represented something earned, not given. "What are you thinking?" Damien murmured. "That a year ago, I was being sold into servitude," she replied. "And today I am dancing at my own engagement ball, surrounded by people who respect me, who see me. Lives change in ways we could never imagine. For the better," he said, holding her closer. "Always for the better, when we have the courage to change with them." But not all of the evening was perfect. Sometime after midnight, when the ball was in full swing, Helena noticed a commotion near the entrance. A group of young aristocrats, clearly drunk, was trying to enter without an invitation. "We've come to see the Black Widow," one of them shouted. "They say she can predict deaths. Let's test her." Security moved to remove them, but Helena placed a hand on Damien's arm. "No," she said calmly. "Let me handle this." She walked to the entrance, her posture erect, her face serene. The young men saw her approach and fell momentarily silent. There was something in her presence, a quiet authority, that surprised them. "Gentlemen," Helena said, her voice clear but not loud, "you came to mock me. You came to ask me to predict your deaths, perhaps, to treat me as morbid entertainment." The leader of the group, a young viscount who couldn't have been more than 20, at least had the decency to look ashamed. It was just a joke, my lady." "Then let me make my own prediction," Helena said, walking slowly around them. "I predict that if you continue on this path, drinking to excess, treating others with disrespect, living as if your actions have no consequences, you will not die young, but you will live long, empty lives. You will grow old without purpose, without true respect, surrounded by people who pretend to love you for your title, but who truly despise you." She stopped in front of the Viscount, looking him directly in the eyes. "But I also predict that you can choose differently. You can choose to grow, to mature, to use your privilege for something more than selfish entertainment. The choice is yours. The future is not written in stone, it is written in decisions." The silence that followed was absolute. The young Viscount looked at her, something changing in his face. Then, surprisingly, he gave a deep bow. "You are right, my lady," he said, his voice now sober. "And I apologize for the disturbance, for the disrespect, for everything." Helena nodded graciously. "You are forgiven, and if you truly wish to stay and learn rather than mock, you are welcome." They stayed. And later that night, Helena saw them speaking earnestly with some of the investigators and magistrates present, asking genuine questions about the work she and Damien did. "How did you do that?" Damien asked when they were alone for a moment. "You turned mockers into allies with just a few words?" "Because I realized they weren't truly cruel," Helena replied, "just young and foolish, performing for their peers. Sometimes all people need is for someone to see them truly and challenge them to be better." As the first rays of light began to illuminate the London sky, the ball finally ended. The last guests departed with warm farewells and promises of future meetings. Mrs. Halloway, who had made the journey from Yorkshire especially for the event, hugged Helena with tears in her eyes. "I always knew you were special, my lady," the housekeeper said. From the very first day, Helena and Damien were finally alone, amidst the remnants of the ball, candles burned halfway down, heather blossoms still perfuming the air, and a hall that seemed to vibrate with the memory of music and laughter. "It was perfect," Helena said, kicking off her shoes and dancing barefoot among the fallen petals. "Better than anything I could have imagined." Damien pulled her into his arms, and they danced without music, just the sound of their breathing and heartbeats. "This is only the beginning," he promised. "Our life together, our work together, everything we will build. Helena, you have transformed my life as completely as you transformed your own." "We transformed each other," she corrected, "together. And we will keep doing so. For ourselves, and for everyone we will help." The rising sun painted the windows gold, casting light upon two hearts that had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. And in that morning light, after the most important night of their lives, Helena and Damien knew with certainty the real ball was just beginning. The days after the ball passed in an almost ordinary happiness, a word Helena had learned to love. Ordinary did not mean valueless, but rather stable, predictable, safe. She and Damien walked in the London parks on crisp November mornings, took tea with friends in the afternoons, and worked on their investigations in the evenings. But peace, Helena was learning, rarely came without its final tests. It was on a grey December afternoon, as she was reviewing correspondence in the library of their new home, that a letter arrived unlike the others. The envelope was of cheap paper, the seal smudged, and there was no return address. Helena opened it with curious fingers. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. With a shock that made her stagger, Helena recognized it. It was from Margaret. "My dear niece, I suppose you are surprised to receive a letter from me. I confess I am surprised to be writing it. I do not expect forgiveness. I neither deserve nor want it. But I am dying, Helena. The prison doctor says I have perhaps 3 months, maybe less. The irony is not lost on me. I, who killed so many, now die in the most common way, from an illness no poison could prevent or cause. There are things I must say before I go, truths you deserve to know even if they hurt. I was not born evil, you understand. When I was young, I also had dreams. I wanted to marry, have children, have my own home. But your grandfather, my father, decided that my brother, your father, would be the heir to everything, while I would receive only enough not to starve, because he was a man and I was a woman. I watched your father have everything I desired, and when he died and left it all to you, a child, the rage I had cultivated for years finally consumed any goodness that still existed in me. But Helena, and this is what I need you to know, you were never responsible. Not for my choices, not for the deaths of your husbands, not for a single moment of what you suffered. I manipulated everything, every suspicion cast upon you, every whisper at parties, every look of distrust. I cultivated them deliberately. You are not cursed. You were never cursed. You were just my convenient scapegoat. And your gift, as your Marquis calls it, it is real, more real than I ever admitted. You always knew when something was wrong. You tried to warn me about nightmares you had about your father before he died. You tried to tell me you felt something wrong before each marriage. I ignored it because it was convenient, but now I acknowledge it. You perceive things others cannot. I do not write this for redemption. I am beyond saving. I write because you deserve to know that nothing that happened was your fault. You were the victim of my envy, my bitterness, my inability to accept my own fate without destroying that of others. If you can, live well, live gloriously. Do everything I should have done. Use your intelligence, your gift, your kind heart to create something beautiful in the world. And when you think of me, if you think of me at all, remember me not as the monster I became, but as a warning of what unbefed bitterness can create. You were always the better of us. Margaret. Helena read the letter 3 times, each time with different emotions, first shock, then anger, and finally something like sadness, not for Margaret specifically, but for the tragedy of a life wasted on envy, for the loss of what could have been if Margaret had chosen to heal instead of hurt. Damien found her hours later, still sitting with the letter in her hands, silent tears streaming down her face. What happened? He knelt before her, concern evident. Without a word, Helena handed him the letter. She watched his face change as he read, saw anger ignite and then soften into understanding. How do you feel? He asked finally, the same words Helena had been thinking. I don't know, she admitted. It's strange. Part of me wants to scream, to remind her of everything she made me suffer, but another part just feels sadness. For her, for my father, for all of us. So many lives destroyed because one woman couldn't overcome her anger. You don't have to forgive her, Damien said gently. No one would expect you to. I know, Helena wiped her tears. But Damien, if I don't release this anger, I won't just be holding Margaret in my heart, but myself. She already stole enough years of my life. I won't let her steal my future by continuing to carry resentment. Then what do you want to do? Helena thought for a long moment. I want to visit her. Once. Not to give her comfort or forgiveness, but to close this chapter. To see the woman who haunted me for so long as she truly is. Just human, fallible, dying, and then I want to leave her in the past where she belongs. The visit was arranged for the following week. The institution where Margaret was held was not exactly a prison, but it was not comfortable either. A grim place where convicted aristocrats lived out their final days, away from public eyes. Helena chose to go alone. Damien offered to accompany her, but she gently refused. This is something I need to do for myself, she explained. Not for her, but for me. To prove to myself that I am no longer afraid. Margaret was in a small but clean cell, with a narrow window that let in weak light. The illness had transformed her. She was thin, pale, almost unrecognizable as the elegant woman she had once been. But her eyes, when they met Helena's, still held that sharp intelligence. You came, Margaret said, her voice weak. I didn't expect you to. Helena sat on a simple chair a guard had brought. I received your letter. And? Margaret laughed bitterly, a sound that ended in a cough. Have you come to tell me you forgive me? Or have you come to rub my face in the fact that you won? I came to do neither, Helena said calmly. I came because I needed to see you, not as the monster I created in my mind, but as you really are. A woman who made terrible choices and is now paying for them. Margaret studied her for a long moment. You've changed. There is a strength in you that wasn't there before. It was always there, Helena corrected. You just worked very hard to bury it. But you couldn't. No one can completely bury another person's essence, no matter how hard they try. I envied you, Margaret said suddenly. Not just for having my brother's money, but for having hope. Every time you married, there was hope in your eyes. And every time I destroyed it, I felt a sick satisfaction because at least I wasn't the only woman without hope in the world. Helena felt a pang of compassion despite everything. You could have chosen differently, she said. At any moment you could have stopped. You could have told me about your anger, about your feelings. We could have shared the fortune, built something together. I know. Margaret closed her eyes. But anger is a strange thing, Helena. The more you feed it, the more it consumes you until you can no longer see other options. It becomes your identity. Then choose differently now, Helena said, leaning forward. Your final days don't have to be about anger. They can be about peace, or at least about acceptance. Margaret opened her eyes, and for the first time, Helena saw tears there. How? How do I find peace after what I've done? It starts by acknowledging the truth, Helena said, what you did in your letter. And then you remember that we are all more than our worst actions. You are not just the murderer. You were also the woman who taught me to embroider when I was 7, who read stories to me when I was sick, who, before the anger consumed her, had kindness. You remember that? Margaret's voice broke. I remember, Helena said. And I choose to believe that woman still exists somewhere, buried under years of bitterness, and if you can find her again, even for a moment before you go, perhaps there is peace. Margaret wept then, silent tears streaming down her wrinkled face, and Helena, surprising herself, reached out and took Margaret's cold hand in hers. It was not forgiveness. It was not absolution, but it was an acknowledgement of shared humanity, of fallibility, of the fact that all of us carry darkness and light. When Helena left, she felt something release in her chest. The last thread connecting her to the past was not cut with anger, but gently untied. Margaret would die alone with her choices, but Helena no longer had to carry their weight. Damien was waiting in the carriage outside. When she got in, he asked nothing, just pulled her into his arms. It's done, Helena whispered. It's finally done. And as the carriage carried them back through London toward the house they now called home, Helena looked to the future with a heart truly free for the first time in her life. The past had been confronted, accepted, and finally left behind. Now all that was left was to live. Winter covered London in its icy blanket, turning the city into a landscape of white roofs and sleeping gardens. But inside the residence Helena and Damien shared, there was warmth, not just from the fire in the hearths, but from the love that grew day by day. The wedding was set for spring, an intimate ceremony in the chapel at Blackwood Hall. Helena wanted to return to Yorkshire for the vows, the place where she had found not only Damien but herself. The preparations moved forward smoothly. Mrs. Halloway coordinated everything from Yorkshire through frequent letters. The wedding dress was being sewn by a discreet modiste who understood that Helena wanted simple beauty, not ostentation. And the guests were carefully selected, people who truly knew them, not just by title or scandal. But it was in their investigations that Helena and Damien found their true rhythm as partners. Mary Fairfax's case had been resolved. Her brother-in-law confessed under the pressure of accumulated evidence, and Mary's sister's memory finally rested in peace. Other cases occupied them now, a series of suspicious deaths in nursing homes, a pattern of altered wills in wealthy families, mysteries that the regular police had neither the time nor the interest to investigate properly. It was during the investigation of one of these cases that Helena faced her greatest test. A letter arrived from a rural estate in Cornwall. A young woman, only 19, had written desperately. Her name was Elizabeth Hart, and she believed her father was planning to kill her. He has changed since my mother died, Elizabeth wrote. He remarried quickly to a much younger woman, and now they speak in whispers, look at me with strange eyes, and I found pamphlets about poisons hidden in the library. I have terrible premonitions, dreams of my own death. Please, help me. I have no one else. Helena read the letter and felt that familiar tingle, not of present danger, but of future danger if they did not act. We must go, she told Damien. Now, she is in real danger. Cornwall is a 3-day journey, Damien pointed out, and in winter perhaps more. Then we leave immediately. They travelled through snowstorms and icy roads, arriving at the Hart estate 5 days after receiving the letter. The mansion was grim, perched atop cliffs overlooking a stormy sea. Elizabeth received them with frightened but hopeful eyes. She was a beautiful young woman, with golden hair, but devastatingly thin, as if she hadn't eaten properly in weeks. "Thank you from the bottom of my heart for coming," she whispered, casting nervous glances over her shoulder. "My father and stepmother are in the village, but they will return soon. Please, you must get me out of here." "First, we need evidence," Damien said gently. "Elizabeth, show us what you found." She led them to the library. There, hidden behind volumes on gardening, were several pamphlets on poisons: arsenic, strychnine, belladonna. There were also notes in a masculine handwriting, calculating dosages, action times, symptoms. But it was when Helena touched the papers that she felt it. The sensation was overwhelming, not of malice, but of desperation, fear, protection. "Elizabeth," Helena said slowly, "these papers are not about killing you, they are about protecting you." "What?" The young woman looked confused. Damien was already examining the papers more closely. "Helena is right," he said. "Look here, how to recognize symptoms of poisoning, antidotes for common substances. Elizabeth, your father wasn't planning to poison you. He was learning to recognize if someone else tried." "But why?" Elizabeth sat down heavily. "Why would he do this in secret?" "Because perhaps he also had premonitions," Helena suggested, "and didn't want to frighten you." Voices in the hall alerted them. The library door opened, and a middle-aged man entered, followed by a young woman. Upon seeing Damien and Helena, he stopped abruptly. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Elizabeth, who are these people?" "I am the Marquis of Blackwood," Damien said, remaining calm. "And this is Lady Helena Ashford. Your daughter wrote to us, Mr. Hart, because she feared for her life." Hart's face paled. He looked at Elizabeth, then at the papers scattered on the table. "Elizabeth, no, you misunderstood. I was trying to protect you." "From what, Papa?" Elizabeth stood, her voice trembling. "What were you trying to protect me from?" Hart looked at his wife, who had remained silent. She nodded slightly, encouraging him. "From your cousin," he said finally. "Harriet. She is obsessed with our fortune. After your mother died, I started noticing strange things. Food that tasted bitter, Harriet visiting with unusual frequency, always bringing cakes, always insisting that you eat. You started to get sick, to waste away." He ran a hand over his face wearily. "I married Sarah," he indicated his new wife, "not for love at first sight, but because she is a nurse. She knew about poisoning, had experience. Together we began to monitor everything you ate, to intercept Harriet's gifts. And I began to study poisons to know what to look for." "But why didn't you tell me?" Elizabeth was crying now. "Because we had no proof," Sarah said, speaking for the first time. "And Harriet is your family. We didn't want to accuse without certainty, but we were right to be cautious." She went to a locked drawer and produced 3 small vials. "We analyzed the last 3 cakes Harriet brought. All of them contained arsenic." Helena felt all the pieces fall into place. Elizabeth, like herself, had sharp intuition. She had sensed the danger but misinterpreted the source, and her father, trying to protect her in secret, had seemed sinister. "Where is Harriet now?" Damien asked. "She said she would visit tonight," Hart said. "Bringing another one of her damned poisoned cakes, no doubt." "Then we will be here to receive her," Damien said. "And this time, with witnesses and evidence, she will not escape." They set a careful scene. Elizabeth would stay in her rooms, apparently ill, which wouldn't be hard to feign. Hart and Sarah would receive Harriet normally, and Helena, Damien, and a local magistrate Damien quickly summoned would be hidden in the adjoining room. Harriet arrived at dusk, a woman of about 30 with a plain appearance but cold eyes. She brought, as predicted, a fruitcake in a pretty basket. "Poor Elizabeth," she said with false sympathy. "I heard she is still ill." "This cake will certainly cheer her up. It's grandmother's special recipe." "How kind," Hart said, accepting the cake. "But first, Harriet, I would like to show you something." He placed the other 3 cakes on the table, along with the chemical analysis reports. "Do you recognize these? You brought them on your last 3 visits, and each one contains enough arsenic to make a person very ill. Careful dosages, calculated to simulate natural illness over time." Harriet's face went through several shades, first feigned confusion, then indignation, and finally, when she realized there was no escape, a calculating coldness. "Prove it," she said. "Prove that I was the one who put anything in those cakes. They could have been tampered with after." "We can," Damien said, stepping out from his hiding place along with Helena and the magistrate. "Because this cake here, which you just brought, is still in your possession. And I wager that if we test it now, we will find the same poison." Harriet tried to grab the cake back, But the constables the magistrate had brought were already present, and when they tested the cake in front of everyone as Damien had predicted, the arsenic was detected. "Why?" Elizabeth had come downstairs, needing to hear. "Harriet, we were cousins. We grew up together." "Why?" "Because you have everything," Harriet spat, her mask finally falling. "Beauty, fortune, a father who loves you, while I am the poor cousin, always in your shadow. I thought that if you died slowly of illness, your father would be devastated, and I could console him, make myself indispensable, perhaps even marry him and inherit everything." It was Margaret again, Helena realized. Not in the details, but in the essence. Envy turned to murder, an inability to accept that happiness is not zero-sum, that another's success does not mean one's own failure. As they led Harriet into custody, Helena embraced Elizabeth, who was crying with relief and shock. "You saved my life," the young woman sobbed. "Your gift saved me." "No," Helena corrected gently. "Your own gift saved you. You sensed the danger, just as I used to. You just needed someone to help you interpret it correctly. And now you know, when you feel that premonition, it is not madness, it is instinct. Listen to it. Always." That night, in the inn where she and Damien stayed before returning to London, Helena stood at the window looking out at the stormy sea. "You did something extraordinary today," Damien said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "You not only solved a mystery, but you taught Elizabeth to trust herself." "It's what I wish someone had done for me," Helena replied. "Years ago, when I started having premonitions, if someone had said, 'This is a gift, not a curse,' listen to it, how many lives might have been saved? So now you do exactly that," he said, kissing her neck. "For Elizabeth, for Mary, for everyone we seek out. You turn your tragedy into salvation for others." Helena turned in his arms, looking up at the face she loved. "We do," she corrected. "Together, always together." And there, on the edge of the world, with the sea roaring its ancient song, they held each other, two hearts that had found purpose not despite the darkness but because of it, because sometimes it is only by passing through the storm that we learn to truly appreciate the light. Spring returned to Yorkshire with its promise of renewal. The moors burst into life, covered in wildflowers that danced in the gentle wind. Blackwood Hall, which had once seemed so dark and isolated, now shone in the April sun, its windows open, letting in light and fresh air. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, as if nature itself were celebrating. Helena woke in her room, the same one she had arrived in over a year before, frightened and resigned. But how different everything looked now. Mrs. Halloway and Sarah Hart, who had become friends after the case in Cornwall, helped her dress. The wedding gown was simple but stunning. Ivory silk with silver thread embroidery that resembled heather, a delicate veil, and in her hands, a bouquet not of traditional roses but of the same purple heather blossoms from the moors she had learned to love. "You are radiant," Mrs. Halloway said, wiping away tears. "Like a reborn goddess." And Helena felt like it. Not perfect, the scars of her past still existed, probably always would, but healed, whole, complete. The Blackwood Chapel was small and ancient, built of grey stone with stained glass windows that cast colourful beams of light. The guests were few but chosen with love. Caroline Webb and her family, a fully recovered Elizabeth Hart, Mary Fairfax, some of the investigators and magistrates they worked with, and even the young Viscount who had tried to mock Helena at the ball and had since become a genuine ally in their causes for reform. But when Helena entered the chapel to the sound of soft music, she only had eyes for Damien. He was waiting at the altar, dressed elegantly in dark grey that enhanced his stormy eyes. When he saw her, his entire face lit up with a smile that was hers alone, not the cold courtesy he showed the world, but pure warmth and deep love. Helena walked down the aisle alone. There was no father to give her away, no tradition to follow. She walked to Damien of her own free will, each step a declaration of independence and decision. When she reached the altar and took his hands, the priest began the ceremony. But Helena barely heard the traditional words. She was lost in Damien, in his eyes, in his strong hands, holding hers. It was time for the vows. The priest offered the traditional ones, but Damien shook his head. "If you will permit me," he said, "I would like to say my own words." The priest nodded, smiling. Damien turned fully to Helena, holding both her hands. "Helena," he began, his voice hoarse with emotion, "when you arrived at Blackwood Hall just over a year ago, I thought I was acquiring a mystery to solve, but you gave me so much more. You showed me that life can flourish even in the rockiest soil. That strength comes not from never falling, but from rising again and again. That true love does not ignore scars, but honors them as part of the story that makes us who we are." He paused, and Helena saw tears in his eyes. The man who had always been so controlled, so rational, crying openly. "I promise to be by your side in every investigation, every storm, every joy. I promise to listen to your premonitions and trust your instincts. I promise to be not only your husband, but your partner in all things. And I promise to love you not despite your history, but with reverence for everything it has forged you to be." Helena took a deep breath, her own tears flowing freely now. "Damien," she said, her voice clear and steady, "you were the first person in years who looked at me and saw possibility instead of a curse, who offered me not pity, but partnership, who taught me that the past does not define the future unless we allow it to." She squeezed his hands. "I promise to walk by your side in every mystery we choose to solve. I promise to use my gift not as a burden, but as a blessing to help others. I promise to be your equal in strength and vulnerability. And I promise to love you with all the heart you helped me rebuild." The priest, also visibly moved, declared them husband and wife, and when Damien kissed Helena, the small group of guests erupted in applause and cheers. The celebration that followed was simple but joyous. A dinner at Blackwood Hall, with delicious food that Mrs. Halloway had insisted on preparing personally, wine that Damien had brought from his private cellar, and stories. So many stories shared among friends who had become family. But it was as night fell, and the guests began to depart, that the most significant moment occurred. Helena was on the terrace, looking out at the moors bathed in the golden light of sunset, when Elizabeth Hart approached. "Lady Blackwood," the young woman said. Helena was still getting used to her new title. "I would like to ask you something." "Of course," Helena smiled. Do you still have premonitions? Do you still feel when something is wrong?" "Yes," Helena answered honestly, "and now I have learned to listen to them without fear." "Then may I ask you a favor?" Elizabeth hesitated. "Could you teach me to trust my own instincts, to interpret them, to use them to help others as you do?" Helena felt her heart expand. This was it. This was exactly it. Not just solving individual mysteries, but creating a network of people who understood that these gifts were not curses, but valuable tools when used correctly. "It would be an honor," she said, embracing Elizabeth, "not just to teach you, but to start something bigger. A group of people who trust their intuition, who investigate when others ignore, who bring truth where there is darkness." Damien, who had approached quietly, placed his hand on Helena's shoulder. "An order of intuitive investigators," he suggested, his eyes shining. "People like you two, like Caroline, like others we will find, working together, sharing knowledge, saving lives." "Yes." Helena turned in his arms, seeing not just her husband, but her partner in every sense of the word. "It's perfect." That night, after everyone had left and Blackwood Hall grew quiet, except for the crackling of the fireplaces, Helena and Damien stood in the library, their shared sanctuary. "It has been an extraordinary year," Damien said, pulling her onto his lap in the large leather armchair. "From cursed widow to lady investigator, from prisoner to pioneer, from survivor to liver," Helena added. "Because there is a difference, you know. Surviving is just not dying. Living is this. It's having purpose, love, hope. It's waking up each day and choosing to make a difference. And what a difference we will make," Damien promised. "Together, Helena and Damien Blackwood, solvers of mysteries and defenders of the unjustly accused." Helena laughed, the sound light and genuine. "We make a formidable pair, don't we?" "The most formidable," he agreed, kissing her softly. They stayed like that for a long time, simply holding each other, listening to the wind on the moors and the crackling of the fire. And Helena thought about everything that had happened, the tragedies she had endured, the truths she had discovered, the people she had helped, the love she had found. If someone had told her on that terrible day when she arrived at Blackwood Hall a year before that one day she would be here, happy, married, with purpose, she would not have believed it. The transformation seemed too impossible. But here she was, living proof that stories do not end where they seem to end, that dark endings can be just pauses before radiant beginnings, that every person carries within them the capacity to be reborn, no matter how many times life buries them. The clock struck midnight. A new day was beginning. And with it, a new chapter in the lives of Helena and Damien, not a chapter written by fate or curses, but by conscious choices and intentional love. "Ready for our next adventure, Lady Blackwood?" Damien murmured. "Always," Helena replied. "Always ready, always by your side." And there in Blackwood Hall, surrounded by the love they had built and the purpose they had chosen, they kissed again as the clock marked the beginning of their shared future. Outside, the moors stretched out under a starry sky, wild and beautiful and full of infinite possibilities. And somewhere, in some distant city, someone was writing a letter asking for help. A letter that would arrive at Blackwood Hall in a few days, bringing a new mystery, a new chance to make a difference. But that is a story for another day. For now, there is only this: two hearts that found each other in the darkness and chose to create light. Two souls that were broken and helped each other heal. Two lives that separate were incomplete, but together were extraordinary. The Marquis and the Cursed Lady had found their happy ending, but more importantly, they had found their true beginning. And that beginning, like all the best beginnings, was full of promise, hope, and the absolute certainty that no matter what storms came, they would face them together, always together.